Kunjabihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunjabihari Gopi Janavallabha Girivaradhari Jaya Gopi Janavallabha Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Bhaja Janaranjana Yashodanandana Bhaja Janaranjana Jamunatira Vanachari Yamunatira Vanachari Jayarad Amar Ava Kunjabihari Jayarada Madhava Kunjabihari Jaya Gopi Janavallabha Girivaradhari Jaya Gopi Janavallabha Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Bhaja Janaranjana Yashodanandana Bhaja Janaranjana Yamunatira Vanachari Yamunatira Vanachari Jayarad Amarava Kunjabihari Jayarad Amarava Kunjabihari Jaya Gopi Janavallabha Girivaradhari Jaya Gopi Janavallabha Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Bhaja Janaranjana Yashodanandana Bhaja Janaranjana Jamunatira Vanachari Yamunatira Vanachari Jayarada Madhava Kunjabihari Jayarada Madhava Kunjabihari. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. A reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Creation, Chapter 7, The Son of Drona Punished, and we're reading today from Text 3. Tasmin swa ashrame vyaso Padari Shandamandite Asino pa upasrisha Prani dadhayo manasvayam Tasmin swa ashrame vyaso Padari Shandamandite Ashino Papu Pashrisha Prani Dadayo Manasvayam Tasmin Sva Ashrame Vyaso Padari Shandamandite Ashino Pau Pasrisha Prani Dadyo Manasvayam Tasmin Sva Ashrame Vyaso Padari Shandamandite Ashino Pau Pashrisha Pranida Dyao Manasvayam. Tasmin, in that, ashram, sve, own, ashrame, in the cottage, Vyasa Vyasadev, Barari Beri, Shanda trees, Mandite surrounded by, Asina sitting, Apa Upasrisha touching water, Pranidadhyao concentrated, Mana the mind, Svayam himself. Translation. In that place, Srila Vyasadeva, in his own ashram, was surrounded by berry trees, sat down to meditate after touching water for purification. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Under instructions of his spiritual master, Sri Narada Muni, Vyasadeva concentrated his mind in that transcendental place of meditation. Translation again. In that place, Srila Vyasadeva, in his own ashram, which was surrounded by berry trees, sat down to meditate after touching water for purification. Om Ajana Trimandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swaya Rupa Gadamayam Dadati Swa Vadantikam. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. Reading, as I said, from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 7, Text 3. And it was a very small purport. I guess I should say good morning, everybody. Little interesting when speaking into your mobile phone without seeing any other human beings in front. So good morning to everybody who happens to be online listening. And thank you for doing that. If you are there, thank you. Hare Krishna. Yes, it's a very short purport. But actually, in the verse purport, it talks about Vyasadeva touching water for purification. So that's just quite interesting given the times that we're living in right now. And it is quite interesting to note, and I'll just make these comments because of that reference to touching water for purification, and then go back to the general story. But just two thoughts that kind of come to mind in that regard. One is the messaging and the advice that governments, it would seem, all around the world are giving to people at this time, and that is that they should be regularly washing their hands to keep clean, obviously. They shouldn't be touching their hands, certainly not when dirty, to their face, etc., because the virus can get in through the eyes, nose and mouth. And of course, as devotees, we know that we should never really be touching our hands, particularly to our mouths. They even give advice, actually, that when people go outside, when they come back home, that they shouldn't bring their shoes inside, or at least not beyond their kind of hallway or whatever, porches or whatever. So it's interesting that all of these hygiene directives, or the advice that they're giving on how to keep the virus at bay and not to spread it, are all aspects. Shaking hands, and offering, now we see many people offering pranams like that. Of course, this other thing has come in about people touching elbows, but we won't talk about that. But it's more dangerous, actually, because you have to be in proximity to the person where you can be further back offering pranams. But all of these things, in terms of washing hands and not bringing shoes inside, etc., not touching the mouth, they're all things that all of us would have learnt from the first days that we came in contact with Srila Prabhupada's books or Srila Prabhupada's devotees. So in that sense, it's interesting. And then one additional thing that I would mention is that it appears that the biggest challenge for governments around the world is going to be, to use their term, getting the hospitality industries back up and running. And the hospitality industries, primarily, maybe others, whatever, but primarily air travel is one. And of course, so much of air travel, I think I read a statistic, something about 75%, there or thereabouts, of air travel is actually for people going on holidays. Then the other area that they're really struggling with, which definitely affects us in ISKCON around the world, is the opening of restaurants. Again, because of the whole social distancing thing. And then the last one, which seems almost impossible for them to figure out, I guess, is opening pubs like that. But it is interesting, they refer to those as the hospitality industries, when for devotees we could quite easily translate them into the sense gratification industries. So it's kind of interesting that the areas that this virus is hitting the hardest in terms of bringing those areas back to normal are industries where essentially it's about people engaging in sense gratification. So just interesting, again, based on what I'm reading today about purification of the water. So this story, we know that in a previous day of Brahma, so quite some time ago, a little while ago, you can imagine if people had to be locked down for a whole day of Brahma, that would be an interesting phenomenon. But Narada, he appeared as the son of a maidservant. And then some Vaishnavas, Bhaktivedantas, as Prabhupada refers to them, they came to where he was staying with his mother. And as a result of that, Narada, there were three things basically that Narada got an opportunity to do. He obviously got an opportunity to serve those Vaishnavas. He got an opportunity to hear from those Vaishnavas, which, of course, as we understand, is really the most important aspect of devotional life, hearing from devotees and hearing from authority. So he got to serve, he got to hear, and then he also got to take the remnants from those devotees after serving them prasadam, etc. He got to take their remnants. Prabhupada explains that as a result of that, all of his karma was immediately eradicated, and the material modes of nature, which we're, if we're not in Krishna consciousness, and also to the degree that we're in Krishna consciousness, or not in Krishna consciousness, we're governed by those modes of nature. So the whole material world, the whole material universes are being governed by those modes. But they immediately vanished from his heart, and the influence of those immediately vanished in relation to Narada, and he says his ignorance was immediately dissipated. And of course he makes reference, or Prabhupada's making reference, but quoting Narada, that he makes reference that the main ignorance that was removed was Narada identifying both the gross but also the subtle body as the self. And of course that's the thing that we are all still working towards, to achieve that level of realization that Narada had. We of course know very well from a philosophical point of view that we're not these bodies, but actually completely removing any identification with the body is something a little bit, that's another step and another level. But of course we can take great inspiration from these wonderful devotees like Narada Muni. And then before those devotees, those Bhaktivedantists, before they left, they instructed Narada in the most confidential knowledge. And in essence, Prabhupada explains it was the most confidential knowledge was to use everything in Krishna's service. Now, of course, one of the chapters of Bhagavad Gita is called, as we know, the most confidential knowledge. And the second verse in that chapter, chapter 992, is Rajavidya, Rajaguyam, Pavitramidam Uttamam, Pratyakshavāgamam Dhamyam Susukam Kartam Avyayam. That this knowledge, this most confidential knowledge, and it's actually referred to in that verse as being the most secret of all secrets. So this most confidential knowledge and most secret of all secrets is understanding that point, that we're not these bodies. The English used is that we derive direct perception of who we are through realization, as opposed, as I've just said, philosophically and theoretically we understand that we're not these bodies, so that's there. But in this verse, by engaging in devotional service, we can realize that directly, and it's not just theoretical knowledge anymore, it's actually realized knowledge like that. So the difference between gyan, knowledge, and vigyan, realized knowledge, very powerful, very, very powerful when we realize something, as opposed to just understanding it theoretically. So, and of course the last part of that verse is that it's joyfully performed, and I guess we can imagine that, you know, that theory of understanding we're not the body, that once we come to realize it as opposed to just understand it, that wow, that will be such a powerful and joyous thing. So it's joyfully performed, susukam kartamavriya. But specifically then in this pastime, it's being discussed that that a key aspect is understanding that you use everything in Krishna's service. And Prabhupada goes on there to explain that just as the cause of a disease can be rectified by the therapeutic use of the very same cause, and that also goes back to the situation that we're currently in, my very limited understanding of vaccines and all that kind of stuff, is that they take some of the disease itself and put that into your body, so that your body, small bit obviously, and they put that into your body so that it helps your body to develop immunity to it and a reaction to it to fight that like that, and that's how they work. So Prabhupada's using that same example, that or he's using that example, that same with material life, that we have the material conception of something, but once we reverse that and understand that everything is coming from Krishna, and then use that material thing, whatever, all material things, in the service of the Lord, then it becomes perfect like that, and we can then advance in Krishna consciousness in a very powerful way. So it's interesting, just the verse from Chaitanya Charitamrita, Sadhusanga Sadhusanga Sarva Shastra Kai Lavamatra Sadhusange Sarva Siddhi Hai. From Chaitanya Charitamrita, we're advised that just a moment's association, just a fleeting moment, I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think I think it's 1/10, is it? I should have checked that before. I think is it 1/10 of a second, or 1/11th actually? I think it's I don't think it's an even number. I think it's 1/11th, a second of association with a pure devotee, and that's it. You know, our lives are completely changed forevermore. So this is essentially what was happening with Narada when he was associating with the Bhaktivedantists that came to his home like that. And then sometime after that, Narada, he met and then requested Vyasa or Vyasadeva, Srila Vyasadeva, to write the Srimad Bhagavatam and elaborately describe the pastimes of Krishna, so that everybody, by reading those pastimes of Krishna, all living entities who would read, of course, or hear them, that all living entities would become free from all the miseries of material existence. And as we know, they are so plentiful. Again, what so many people are suffering today. But regardless of the current situation, you know, the material miseries are just unlimited in that sense. It's quite an extraordinary thing that they are unlimited. Yet everybody still seems to be seeking happiness in the material world. They're seeking of happiness, of course. Nandamaya Abhyasat, that is our constitutional position, so absolutely nothing wrong with them seeking happiness. But for them to be seeking happiness in the material world, that's where they've got to be redirected. That's where we've been redirected from. There is no point in seeking happiness in the material world. It's futile. And that's the reason, because the material world is just so full of misery. Abrahma Bhuvana Loka, from the highest planet in the material world down to the lowest. All are places of misery wherein repeated birth and death take place. So no matter how happy we become in the material world, we still have to die. And if we haven't perfected our life in this from a spiritual perspective, then of course we have to take birth again, and we just go through the same cycle, and that same cycle of birth, growing old, having to accept diseases, and ultimately dying is miserable. Another aspect of material misery is they're categorized as or put into three categories: Adhyatmic, Adidevic, and Adibhotic. Adidevic are the miseries like the one to some degree we're experiencing now, although you could argue that's also connected to an Adhyatmic factor, but Adibhotic, it's coming from material nature essentially. Material nature reacting to, you know, how we engage. There's one wonderful lecture where Prabhupada talks about pandemics actually, and he's saying you cannot avoid, the living entity cannot avoid the stringent laws of material nature. But of course, and many people react negatively to that, thinking they're cruel, and then if they associate God with the material, with nature, that they then consider God to be cruel. But of course we know, if we look deeper into that subject, that actually this is education, this is for our education. But Prabhupada's making the point, you cannot avoid the stringent laws of material nature. So that's Adidevic, we can't avoid those. And we know they come in so many varieties, you know, through earthquakes and floods and all these different things. And now, for the first time in my life, and I guess for anybody who's listening in, for the first time in their lives, we've experienced one of these pandemics like this. So their reactions, they're Adidevic reactions. Then we have Adibhotic reactions, and Adibhotic is understood to be the negative material reactions that we get from other living entities. And it goes back to this again, you know, in terms of, you know, how living entities are mistreated. At least that we don't need to get into all the specifics, but it seems like a very good chance of understanding where this whole pandemic started. That a good chance is that we understand it came from animals, and it came from those animals because of our association with those animals in terms of the gross way that they get treated, slaughtered, etc., eaten, and all that kind of thing, and, you know, wet markets and all the rest, which I won't get into now. So Adibhotic reactions, sinful reactions, or not sinful reactions, but reactions from other living entities. Simple things. You can go out, you know, for your walk today, and you can get bitten by a dog. That's an Adibhotic reaction. And then Adhyatmic. And Adhyatmic, in many respects, is the most interesting, which is essentially reactions, reactions coming from ourselves, from our own mind, in essence. You know, one of my favourite verses from Bhagavad Gita, Udared Atmanatmanam Natmanam Uvashadayet, that the mind can be our greatest friend and our worst enemy. It's our greatest friend when we're in control of it. It's our worst enemy when we're not in control of it. So, Adhyatmic reactions that we get from our own mind. And again, going back to the current situation that we're in, it's also interesting that one of the things that people are being badly affected by, and, you know, governments, etc., whatever health authorities are concerned with, is people's mental health. So that's the thing. The mind is such a powerful tool, that if we don't have some semblance of control in relation to our minds, then the suffering is very, very intense and very great like that. So the material world and the struggling. So Narada had advised Vyasa if he could compile the Srimad Bhagavatam and all the pastimes of Krishna to relieve all of those sufferings, not just one in terms of any particular material suffering, not just one in terms of any of the categories of material suffering, just material suffering right across the board. That this is how to eliminate, not just mitigate it, but to completely eliminate material suffering, is by absorbing ourselves and everyone else absorbing themselves in understanding and relishing. That's the thing, it's relishing the pastimes of Krishna because they are most relishable. Makchita madgata prana bodhanyata palas palam. Katayanchascha mamnicham tushanti cha ramanti cha, that these pastimes and knowledge of Krishna, etc., is just so relishable. Vyasa, when that request came from Narada, he was interested, as we all are in situations like this. A conversation, it's backwards and forwards. He was interested and curious, as to what Narada had done or did after those Bhaktivedantists, because up until that point, Narada's life was going in a certain direction, etc., with his mother and all of that. But once that point came, then Narada's life, completely changed. It just completely changed. So Vyasadeva was curious as to, what Narada did after those Bhaktivedantists left where he was, and how did he obtain his current body, his current situation that he's in. And Vyasadeva was interested and asked Narada for his memory of those events, and Narada explained that he was just 5 when those devotees came, and up to that point his mother, she had tried very hard, which is so natural for a mother. Prabhupada explains that the mother's love for the children, for the baby, for the children, etc., the mother's love for the baby, for the children, is the closest love that we can experience in this material world, because it's essentially selfless, and based on selflessness, the mother will literally, in general, you can get exceptions in the material world, but in general, the mother will do literally anything for the children like that. So it's a very pure love, certainly pure in the context of material love. And Prabhupada uses that as an analogy, saying it's the closest love that we're likely to experience in the material world to what you will experience in the spiritual world. So Narada explaining to Vyasadeva that his mother was, she was endeavouring to bind him with the rope of affection, like that. But her life was a real struggle, and we know that situation, that his mother's life was a real struggle, and she had to do everything. And one day, when she was milking a cow, she was bit by a snake, a serpent, whatever. She was bit on her leg like that, and she subsequently passed on. And as a result of that, this most sincere of souls, of course he was only 5, and some of our most wonderful stories of wonderful devotees is when they're very young, like Dhruva, etc., Prahlad. But in this way, the most sincere of all souls, Narada, he had his mum taken from him. Actually, I probably shouldn't do this. Well, I also had my mother taken from me. I was a little older, I was 12. But I'm 58 now. So how long that ago that was then, turned a little 46 years ago. It remains the most traumatic experience of my life. By far and away, the most traumatic experience of my life, learning that my mother had died. And as I say, I was 12, but I've never experienced anything as painful as her passing. So Narada was 7 years younger than me. He was only 5, and he had his mother taken from him because of the event of the serpent biting her. So, certainly from the normal human material perspective, that must have been so difficult and challenging for Narada. But he basically, he was at the complete mercy of the Lord in that sense, and he took that. I would have crumpled up into a crumpled heap and been sobbing and crying, etc., and looking for someone to put their arm around me and all of that kind of thing. But Narada, he took this as a special mercy from the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And he started on his life as a Parivrajacharya, that he started traveling and preaching. Not just preaching, actually, although obviously preaching, but also experiencing the all aspects of the material world like that, and becoming fearless, basically developing fearlessness as a result. So it may seem surprising that, a 5-year-old boy left all alone in the world, and takes it as an auspicious sign from the Supreme. Because generally we find that most people, when they experience, like I'm explaining for myself, when we experience loss or lament, oftentimes people look and they want to blame God. You know, they want to actually, you know, turn and say, well, how can God? It's such a fundamental. It's arguably arguably, because, you know, it's coming to my mind right now, I'm sure we could all think of other examples, but arguably one of the biggest blockages, one of the biggest blockages, stumbling blockages will do, one of the biggest blockages to us in terms of us trying to give people Krishna, and obviously people accepting Krishna and Krishna consciousness, is this problem that we see, and Narada Muni is absolutely the perfect example of this, seeing a difficult situation like his mother dying as the special mercy of the Lord. So it's a glorious thing to help us in our spiritual journey. Whereas most people, if something really negative happens and they can't see an obvious explanation for it, so therefore it's more esoteric or whatever, if you're trying to present God to them, the concept of God to them, then such a common reaction is, how can God be so cruel? Why is God so cruel? So you could argue this is really the biggest stumbling block to our preaching mission, you know, getting people to understand this is not cruelty, this is mercy, as not witnessed, as manifested here by Narada Muni. This is not cruelty, this is mercy. And it's devotees like Narada that can show the world that a devotee like that sees in every step the special mercy of the Lord. So in that mood, Narada took God as his only shelter, his only maintainer, Krishna as his only shelter, only maintainer. Didn't, you know, try to make some economic adjustment to help his situation or anything like that, or seek comfortable living, but he took to traveling like that. And he passed through, it's described how he passed through, you know, different metropolises, so big cities, etc., with loads of people, but also towns, also villages, farms, etc. I think it describes him going through mines, agricultural lands, gardens, forests, etc. But he also visited some of those forests he visited were very, very dangerous. You know, I think Prabhupada uses the phrase they were the playground for all sorts of snakes, jackals, and all sorts of dangerous animals like that. So this wasn't a whimsical journey, as you again would probably expect from somebody so young. It wasn't a whimsical journey like that. This was Narada Muni beginning, and if not also fulfilling, the life of a mendicant, and to experience all varieties of God's creation. And as I say, it was this is the stage of renounced life known as Paravrajacharya, where you do that, you travel all alone, and learn to just basically depend on the mercy of the Lord like that. Then after he had completed that journey, it's described that he sat down under a banyan tree and began to meditate on the Supersoul situated in his heart. And of course, you know, this is something that we all have completely in common with Narada Muni, that the Supersoul is dwelling in all of our hearts. And actually, in again, we're referencing the time that we're living in, this pandemic time that we're living in. You know, in normal times, we're seeing and associating with so many different people like that, but now that's much less because of the lockdown situation, etc. So you could argue that it's a time to be more reflective, and particularly for devotees then, because it's something that, you know, the Supersoul is in our hearts, but how often do we think about that? What to speak of fully realizing it? So anyway, here's an example of Narada Muni. He sat down after all his, of course he had performed all these austerities to get to this point, but then he sat down under a banyan tree and he meditated on the Supersoul within his heart. And as he did that, and realizing more and more the presence of the Lord, tears were rolling down from his eyes. And then what happened? He immediately, Lord Krishna appeared. I think Prabhupada uses the phrase on the lotus of his heart, that he appeared. So basically speaking, Narada Muni got the personal association of Krishna. And Prabhupada explains, again important, because these are really, in many respects, advanced subject matters that we're dealing with, so they cannot be taken lightly. And Prabhupada explains that Narada Muni did not perform any concocted type of meditation. Rather, his meditation was wholly and exclusively on the basis of authorized scripture and authority like that. And that was the basis of his focusing on Krishna. It wasn't a concocted, whimsical thing that was taking place like that. And there are different stages of this realizing, coming to this point of essentially prema as what was happening. So we know that the first stage is Shraddha, to have some faith. And as devotees, we're all really, really blessed with having that faith, because as we know, so many in the material world don't have that faith. They don't accept the existence of God, and they don't have faith that God exists. I'm not sure of the exact statistics, but I did read, it was some years ago, I read, because in India, essentially you've got two religions, although we know there are just millions of different versions of worship, but you've got essentially two religions. One is impersonalism, and one is personalism. And I think some years ago, again, I should fact check it, as they say, but my memory is that I think it was 75% of people in India would fall into the impersonal category, so only 25% falling in the personal category like that. So we're very fortunate that we have some Shraddha, and from that Shraddha, usually you want to associate with like-minded persons, so you seek out other people who have similar faith. And of course, as we talked about in the very beginning, sadhusanga, sarvashastra, kai like that, if you get the association of pure devotees, then even a tiny amount of that association, 1/11 of a second, I think it is, you can achieve perfection. So, of course, we have many wonderful devotees in the Hare Krishna movement on various levels of advancement, but they all have faith. And they're all engaging in devotional service, so we can learn and get so much benefit from them. But then in addition to that, we have Srila Prabhupada, who has only left us a relatively short period of time in the context of eternity, at least in the context, 40 odd years ago. But not only is it such a short time that Prabhupada physically left, but he left with us so much, all of his books, all of his videos, so many talks that Prabhupada gave, and sangha that he gave has been recorded like that. So we're super, super fortunate in that regard. So anyway, Shraddha will generally lead to us seeking the association of devotees. And then once we get the association of devotees, the next thing that happens is bhajana kriya. We engage in devotional activities, just like now we're tuning in, albeit remotely, to Srimad Bhagavatam class. So we won't be talking about politics or economics or sport or any of those kind of things. No, because we're in the association of devotees, we engage in bhajana kriya, activities that are meant to help us in our devotional life. And then after practicing, for nicely and sincerely for a period of time, we'll eventually reach the stage of nishta, or steadiness, that we become completely steady in our Krishna consciousness. And then from steadiness, we keep on being steady, obviously, the nature of steadiness. We keep on being steady and continue to practice our sadhana and sadhana bhakti like that. And then we will come to the stage of ruchi, or taste. We'll get a genuine, actual taste for Krishna consciousness. It goes back to the point about the therapeutic use of something that's essentially negative, but you use it in Krishna's service, then it becomes super positive. So in the same way, like that, we continue with the process of Krishna consciousness, and even though we're not necessarily receiving any taste or significant taste, etc., usually Krishna will throw us something, certainly in the beginning stages, so as that we get a taste for what it's really like that, but then put us through a more disciplined stage, but if as long as we have faith and continue to engage, then eventually that taste will come back in abundance, and then we get onto other stages of Ashakti and Bhava, and then ultimately leading to what we're discussing here about Narada Muni, that we reach Prema Bhakti, pure love of Krishna. But Prabhupada does explain that there is no other way of achieving this than going through those stages of devotional life, those 9 stages. We cannot try and concoct something and try to jump over and reach these things, more quickly than that, or do anything in a kind of a cheap way. That's not actually possible. So Narada Muni was able to achieve that stage shortly after leaving home. Not sure exactly how short, and maybe a little longer than we might imagine. But anyway, it probably says shortly after leaving home. The tears flowing down from his eyes, they indicate the feelings of separation that he had for Krishna, and that he was actually able to perceive the presence of the Lord. That's the point of talking about us in terms of the super soul and focusing on the super soul. And again, it shouldn't be done artificially. But because of his advanced and developed spiritual senses, Narada Muni was actually able to really where's the heart? That he was actually able to experience the presence of the Lord in his heart like that. So this is what Narada was explaining to Srila Vyasadeva as a result of Vyasadev's inquiry about what actually happened, after those Bhaktivedantists left. What did Narada do? So this is what he did, not just what he did in terms of traveling through forests, etc., as we've discussed, but then he also achieved this stage of prema bhakti. And I have one quote here from Narada Muni, a direct quote, so I'll read that. And it says, "O Vyasadeva, at that time, being exceedingly overpowered by feelings of happiness, every part of my body became lucid, being absorbed in the ocean of ecstasy." So every part of his body became lucid like that, being overwhelmed with this kind of ecstasy. And then Narada goes on to describe the form of the Absolute Truth as he saw that form. And he says that the transcendental form of the Lord as it is perfectly apt to satisfy the mind, the desires of the mind. And again, going back to the mind, Udared Atmanatmanam Natmanam Uvashadayet, it's our greatest friend when we control it, it's our worst enemy when we don't. So the mind is very powerful, as we've discussed, and it has all sorts of desires. Yet Narada is explaining that seeing the form of the Lord, that alone, that was sufficient for Narada Muni, for all of the mind's desires to be satisfied. And that he didn't see or experience the Lord as formless. But Prabhupada explains he didn't, obviously Krishna wasn't formless, and Narada saw Krishna, but not only was Krishna not formless, but he was not like any form in the material world also. So it wasn't that Narada was just seeing something akin to or similar to something forms that he would see in this world already. This was something beyond anything that you can experience or see in the material world, and that's why Narada's mind was completely satisfied and satiated by seeing the form of the Lord. But then, as we know, Krishna in that form, he departed, and Narada wasn't able to see Krishna anymore. And it's interesting because we also have the example of Maharaj Parikshit, or Parikshit, as we know, is known as the examiner, and he was always, that's what he was always trying to do, to see the form of the Lord again that he had seen when he was in the womb of his mother like that. So this is kind of Krishna's pastime with these incredible devotees, that they get to see him. This is satisfying. It's everything they've ever dreamed of. But then the Lord retracts himself, and this just increases. Now again, from a material point of view, we may get frustrated, say, "Oh, well, why are you doing that? Why are you teasing me?" or whatever we may think in relation to that. Of course, it's never happened to us, so and maybe that's why, because of the reaction we might have. But that isn't the reaction of these great devotees like Narada Muni, Maharaj Parikshit, etc. Their thing is it just increases their desire to see the Lord again. I think Narada says something like, "Not seeing that form again, I suddenly got up, being perturbed in mind, as it happens when one loses that which is most desirable." I think that's the phrase that's used. But again, it's not that Narada became upset and bitter or anything like that. Absolutely not. He just became more desirous to again see the Lord, and he again concentrated his mind on his heart. Initially, I think, hoping that he might see Krishna again as it just happened, but that didn't happen because Krishna had a different plan, and probably explains that there's never a mechanical process to see the form of the Lord. It completely depends on the Lord's causeless mercy. Such an important point. Of course, man proposes, God disposes. It's not that we just sit back and do nothing for our entire lives and just expect that Krishna's going to do everything for us. But at the same time, it isn't that that there's a deal taking place, that if we do X, Y, and Z, then we get X, Y, and Z. Ultimately, everything is dependent on the mercy of the Lord. And of course, during this age that we're in now, Kali Yuga, it's so much easier to access the mercy of the Lord, because Lord Chaitanya has made himself so freely available like that. So, but that's his mercy. That's not something that we can demand or expect or arrange. No, but Lord Chaitanya has come, and in that mood of causeless mercy, and made it so much easier for us to access that like that. So by the causeless mercy of Krishna, Supreme Personality of Godhead, the Lord spoke to Narada Muni. And I also have that quote, and it says, O Narada, I regret very much that during this lifetime you will no longer be able to see me. Now, of course, ultimately Krishna, it's his own sweet will. He could do anything, but he's explained to Narada, anyway, in this lifetime you'll no longer be able to see me. Those who are incomplete in service or still immature in being freed from all material dirt can hardly see me. O virtuous one, you have only once seen my person. This is just to increase your hankering for me, because the more you desire me, the more you will be freed from material desire. I'll just start, there's a little more, but just to comment on that, so we have material desire. Sometimes it feels like it's overwhelming, so powerful. The way to control our material desire, the way to get on top of all of this, is by desiring Krishna, desiring his service, wanting to know more about him, ultimately seeing him like that. Now, of course, we can see Krishna. We can see Krishna in his deity form, in pictures like that. But just that focus that this is how we overcome our material desire. And this is, of course, why Narada has asked Vyasadeva to write Srimad Bhagavatam, recite Srimad Bhagavatam, so that people have that to meditate on, to read, to relish, to absorb themselves in, because that is what decreases our material desire and ultimately completely eradicates our material desire. So the more you'll be freed from material desire. By service of the absolute truth, even for a short time, a devotee's intelligence becomes fixed firmly on me. As a result, he goes on to become my associate in the transcendental world after giving up the present deplorable material worlds. That's a realization that we can hold on to. This material world, and of course Prabhupada's using it in the plural because there's more than one, but the material world that we're dwelling in, it's deplorable, and it's a fallible soldier, and everything connected to it is a fallible soldier, meaning it will let us down. So logically, we shouldn't invest ourselves in it, expecting that somehow or another it's going to look after us and make us happy, etc., etc. So after giving up the present deplorable material worlds, intelligence engaged in my devotion can never be defeated at any time, even at the time of creation, as well as at the time of annihilation. So let's read that again. Intelligence engaged in my devotion can never be defeated at any time. So our intelligence that's engaged in Krishna's devotion, and the intelligence, of course, that Krishna gives us, that can never be overcome, can never be defeated at the time of creation, at the time of annihilation. And your remembrance of me will continue by my mercy. So again, we understand that the process of death is in general a very difficult process. But if we have tried to absorb our lives in the service of Krishna, in the memory of Krishna, then Krishna is saying here to Narada, he's not just saying at death, although you can make the comparison between death and the annihilation of the universes, but that's what Krishna is saying. Death, annihilation of the universe, doesn't matter. That I will protect your memory of me. And again, the point about this is all Krishna's mercy. It's not of our own doing. Yes, we make an endeavor to show our sincerity, etc., but ultimately it's all Krishna's mercy. And how powerful is that? So we endeavor in this lifetime to serve Krishna, to remember Krishna. And then Krishna, at the time of death, he will protect our remembrance of him. I mean, what a wonderful commitment from Krishna to us, that we try our best and then Krishna will protect our memory of him. Anyway, we can understand from all of these pastimes, etc., how wonderful a devotee that Narada is. And Krishna's expressing sadness at the lack of his own presence, but then giving that guarantee we've just discussed, in terms of protecting Narada's remembrance of him at the time of death, time of creation, time of annihilation. And, this was a special gift of Narada, and what to speak of ordinary devotees and what to speak of non-devotees. We don't have that access. Well, at least we have the access, but it has to be done in an authorized way, and we shouldn't take any of these things in that sense cheaply. We have to qualify ourselves if we want to engage in the transcendental love of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. There is, from Krishna's point of view, yes, we have to qualify ourselves, because from Krishna's point of view, of course, and again, his own sweet will, from Krishna's point of view, there's no difficulty on his part in coming to us whenever he wills it or whenever he wants it. There's no difficulty. Nothing can stop Krishna. Krishna can do anything that he wants. Just in the context, but for us, it's dependent on Krishna's mercy. So in that sense, it's very difficult for us, if you like, but it's as easy as pie for Krishna to do that if he so desires. And Prabhupada gives the example that while it may be very difficult, and again, going back to us as devotees and trying to spread the message of Krishna consciousness, I know many devotees meditate on the idea of trying to have influence over world leaders, because obviously world leaders, if you look at their, Facebook page or their Twitter page and all these different things, they have millions of people following them. Whereas if you look at I don't have a Facebook, well, I do, but I don't use it. But anyway, if you look at whatever we use as mediums to connect with people, our followings are a little bit less than that, but they have millions upon millions upon millions of people following them. So therefore, if they give a message, there's a good chance that message will get to a very, very large audience. So many devotees meditate like that in trying to make a connection in that way with world leaders so that they can help us spread the message of Krishna consciousness. But it's very difficult. It's very difficult to connect with those leaders, just not so easy. So Prabhupada gives that as an example, that if we as an ordinary Joe Soap want to meet the president or want to meet the prime minister or want to meet the king or the queen or whatever it may be, that ain't so easy. That's you have to go through all sorts of protocols and whatever, and even still, you may not achieve it. But if the Prime Minister, President, Head of State, King, Queen, whatever, if they want to meet a citizen, I mean, ultimately in one sense a citizen could refuse, but generally they don't. But if they want to meet a citizen, that's very easy. They just send out a message, oh, I'd like to meet this person, and then, in no time they've met that person like that. So it's all like that. It's all based on the will of the Lord. As Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Maharaj once said, which we quote quite often, don't ask, as devotees, as non-devotees, we shouldn't ask to see God, but rather we should act in a way that God will see us. That God will have no choice to see us because of our sincerity, devotion, etc. So the perfection of human life is attained by chanting Krishna's holy names, by associating with the devotees, and by engaging in practical service for Krishna and Krishna's pure and wonderful devotees like Narada Muni, and of course, particularly for us, like Srila Prabhupada. That just engaging, just being able to hang on to the coattails of Srila Prabhupada and his movement and his mission is such a privilege for us all to be able to do that. Such a privilege, such an honor, and ultimately it's to our incredible benefit to be able to do so. And by doing so, we will ultimately be able to Vishaya Vinivartante. We will be able to receive that higher taste that will eradicate the modes of nature having influence over us, will eradicate ignorance from our heart, and will allow us to be able to enter into Krishna's very most confidential pastimes as a result of following that process and reaching the stage of prema bhakti. As Narada Muni, I think himself said, being free from all material taints, I met with death just as lighting and illumination occur simultaneously. And Prabhupada explains that if there's light, there's illumination like that. So when a devotee changes their body after death, they can receive a spiritual body by the will of the Lord. And, we could receive a spiritual body by the will of the Lord regardless. But generally speaking, by engaging in devotional service, then the Lord, just as the quote from Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj said, the Lord is, if you like, almost obliged, ultimately not, but almost obliged then to actually look after us based on the sincerity and the devotion that we've been striving to achieve throughout our entire lifetime. Okay, I think my time is up, and I don't want to abuse that and take more of your time, because obviously after Bhagavatam class every day, we engage in service. That's our practical service. That's kind of the balance between those two things. Srila Prabhupada also famously said, work now, samadhi later. I think a reasonable interpretation of that, because sometimes it can be taken that we should just work and whatever. I think a reasonable interpretation of that is that there's a good balance between our sadhana and our internal devotional activities, and then also our practical devotional service. And I think if we strive to get that balance right and nice, that will greatly help us in our devotional life and in our advancement through the various stages of devotional life. I said I didn't want to abuse, but I just want to finish with just one thought. This part of the part of the Bhagavatam that we're discussing right now is very much talking about parampara. And of course we know that in the parampara there's only one person between Krishna and Narada, and that's Lord Brahma. So Narada Muni is like, he's an acharya in all senses of the word. But essentially we're talking about parampara, evam parampara praptam. So I just wanted to finish with a thought, and this thought is really, the mood of it is in glorification of Srila Prabhupada. Obviously, I've just mentioned that only in between Narada and Krishna, we just have Lord Brahma, and we're part of the Brahma Madhva Gaudiya Sampradaya. And obviously, Brahma is referring to Lord Brahma. Madhva is referring to Madhvacharya because of the significant contribution he made to our parampara. So therefore his name was inserted. Lord Brahma, it used to be the Brahma Sampradaya, then it became the Brahma Madhva Sampradaya. And then of course Lord Chaitanya came, and that's why it's called the Gaudiya. So the Brahma Madhva Gaudiya Sampradaya, because of the incredible contribution also that Lord Chaitanya made like that. So in that sense, these paramparas, they have, or the parampara, they have a lineage, and obviously the starting point of that lineage, in our case Lord Brahma, is there and always remains. But through the course of time, other personalities can be referred to in that lineage because of their contribution. So it would seem to me that, if not in our lifetime, that at some point in the future, Srila Prabhupada will be included in that parampara. I guess the only question will be, will it be the Brahma Madhva Gaudiya Prabhupada Sampradaya, or will it be the Brahma Madhva Gaudiya ISKCON Sampradaya? Who knows? But the incredible contribution that Srila Prabhupada has given, and all of us would not be here today if it hadn't been due to the contribution that Srila Prabhupada gave us. So I'll just finish on that note. and thank Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai, and pray that by his mercy we'll be able to receive the mercy of Lord Sri Krishna. Thank you all very much. Hare Krishna, and please try to stay as healthy